Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for the webinar. Just a couple things before we get started. If you have any questions that you'd like to ask Danielle, please use the chat function to send those in throughout the webinar, and we'll try to get to those at the end. And if you missed getting the handouts via the download when you logged into the webinar, you can email education@medela.com for those, and we'll send those out to you later today. Danielle, if you want to get started, go right ahead.
Thank you very much, Kim. I hope everybody can hear me. So it's wonderful to join. There we are. It's wonderful to have everyone join me to give this presentation, which is a deep dive into the new breast shield that Medela is selling, the PersonalFit Plus and/or Flex. What I've been asked to do today is to give a really brief overview of the research behind the breast shield. The publication is now freely available in a peer-reviewed journal article as of April this year, so that was a nice milestone. And then what I'm going to do is dig into sizing and fitting. The new design of the breast shield does have some implications for how we can size and fit mothers appropriately. And so that's essentially what I would like to talk about today. I hope it's very practical based so that you can leave this presentation with a new perspective of how to fit and some of the challenges that you might be experiencing with fitting might be explained in general. Most of what I talk about will be for any shield in terms of fitting, and there'll be a couple of little nuances for the new design, which I'll specify. So to start with, I'll just do my disclosure. So I am currently an employee of Medela AG. My name is Danielle Prime. I have a PhD in lactation science from the University of Western Australia. The research I'm going to show you in the majority of this presentation, I am the primary investigator of that research. However, my function is part of the research team at Medela in Switzerland. So what I'm going to cover, first of all, is the new breast shield design, what has changed. I'll be very precise and show you some imagery of what is different about the new shield. I'll briefly overview the clinical research results and why this change to the design of the shield really did improve milk output. But then I want to dig deeper into why this change makes a difference. What is the mechanism that we're dealing with in terms of why do we see more milk with this new shield? And then finally, the bulk of the presentation will be about the implications for sizing and fitting. So I really want to step you through how to fit the right size, how to select it, how to measure the mother's nipple, and some other anecdotal pieces that come from hospitals that we've been working with to do with edema and swelling or to do with skin elasticity. So fitting breast shields is not an easy task, but I do hope at the end of this presentation you'll feel a little bit more empowered to give it a go and understand what you're seeing when you're working with your mothers. Okay, so first of all, I'll talk about the design of the breast shield and milk removal. And for the first time, we can really say that the design of a breast shield really does impact milk removal. And I say that in a kind of with a surprise element because for a very, very long time, we never really knew just how much a breast shield could impact the outcome in terms of milk output. What I mean by that is that historically, any research, and there's not much, but any research that was done on pumping tended to be focused on the pump, right? The pump, the motor in the pump, the vacuum the pump was creating, the cycle rate the pump was generating. And this part, the breast shield, was predominantly forgotten. And this breast shield, this piece of plastic, directly interacts with the mother's tissue. And always been a believer that this part, this interface between the breast shield and the mother's tissue could really drive whatever milk output the mum is going to get. So we can make a pump on one end that has all the bells and whistles, but if the mother isn't well fitted and if that piece of plastic contacting her tissue is not well designed, then she may just simply not release milk. And now, based on this publication, we know for sure that the design of the breast shield really does impact pumping outcomes. And the reason we wanted to do a randomized controlled trial on what many might consider a fairly boring topic, I find breast shields super interesting. I can't say that many people do. But what I really wanted to know at the end of this study was if we found no difference between two breast shields that we were testing, then we can ignore this part. Then we're as good as we're going to be, and we don't have to worry about innovating or trying to improve this piece of the puzzle anymore. However, if we found that this piece of the puzzle, the breast shield, improved milk outcomes, then it needs to have a better spotlight put on it in the future, and it can be given that level of respect in terms of clinical action required. So I'm going to step you through now how we can, the results of the study and why we can now say that the breast shield design really does impact milk removal. So the breast shield design, what has changed? If I'm going to say what has changed, I have to define what a breast shield is. And for many of you on the call, this is a no-brainer, but I always like to start with definitions. A breast shield has two key parts. Firstly is this tunnel, and the tunnel is really where the nipple is moving back and forth. So we need to make sure that this tunnel can accommodate a nipple of an appropriate size. The other part of the breast shield is this part, the flange, this cup part that attaches to the breast. And what we actually changed was actually this part. And the reason we changed it is because if you have a look here, what we talk about are these angles. The breast shield of convention, so the standard breast shield, which you find actually on almost most pumps that are out there, is a classic 90-degree angle. So you can see here the angle between here and here is 90 degrees. And what we've done is open that angle up. So we've got an opening angle here of 105 degrees. So this means that the flange is a little bit more open. That cup is a little bit wider so that the breast can actually really get into that location. And I'm going to show you a very brief video just to kind of explain that a little bit further. So here's a 90-degree angle. We tried lots of different angles, to be very honest. We opened it all the way up to 120, which is really quite open. It's nearly 180 would be flat, but 120 was really, really quite wide. We found some negative effects of having it too open. And so we wound it back down to around 110, and we landed on 105 as being the optimal fit to the contour of the breast along the surface. So this part here is what we have changed. We have changed the opening angle of the breast shield of that flange to 105 degrees, landing at this point here. So that's the only thing that we've changed, okay? So if we have a look now at what we did in the study then, is that you can have a see here. We tested the 90-degree standard with this 105-degree more open. Now, I do lie a little bit. I said it's the only thing that we changed. To be honest, we also did make a new shape. So you'll see that it's not round anymore, it's oval. But I have to say, it's complicated to explain it. My hands are waving around in the air. I know no one can see me, so it's always awkward. There is an oval shape to the new breast shield, but it's not an oval in terms of the angle. The 105-degree angle is consistent all the way around, okay? What is different is that there's just this extra little lip of plastic on two edges. So it's kind of an optical illusion. It is an oval shape, but what we really changed was the angle. The 105-degree angle is maintained all the way around that interface here, and that's the key driver. I'll mention a little bit more about the oval shape later, but we actually did some preliminary studies with a round version and an oval version, and we saw no difference in terms of the nipple movement and the contact to the breast. So this is why we are very confident that the mechanism behind the improvement is the opening angle and not the shape. But again, we can go into that later. Okay, so we conducted this study where we really compared this shield 90 degrees against 105. The design of the study was a randomized controlled trial, and the cleverness is that it's a crossover design. So what that means is that a mother would come into the study, we would say, okay, we're going to randomize you into either group 1 or group 2. If you're in group 1, then what is different is that when you first come in, perhaps you receive the 90-degree breast shield, and then when you come back in a second time, you receive the 105-degree breast shield. If you were randomized into group 2, then you would receive the 105-degree breast shield first, and then the 90-degree breast shield. So what this means is that each subject is effectively their own control. And that's really important when we do research in lactation, because variability between mothers, between breasts, between nipples make doing studies at this finite degree very difficult if you have two completely different populations in the two groups or the two arms of the study. So a crossover design really helps us to make sure that the only thing that's changing between the period 1 and the period 2 is the shield, not the mother, not the nipple, et cetera, et cetera. So to conduct the study, here's the consult flowchart. Everything is available in the publication, of course. We had 49 mothers, and those mothers were nursing infants that were between 1 and 6 months old. The reason we included mothers that were between 1 and 6 months old is because this is when milk supply or lactation is established. So when you conduct a study where you have a time between the first pump session and the second pump session, which was only 1 to 2 weeks, but we really want to make sure that her breast is functioning the same on the first visit as it is at the second visit, okay? So what that means is that if we have mothers participating and they're in the first week or first 2 weeks after the birth of their child, their milk supply is naturally building, and by the time they come for their second visit, their milk supply is higher, and the way that their milk output works is different. So that's why we select mothers in this age, with babies in this age category, so that we can be, again, sure that their supply was stable and any difference in volume is to do with the shield and not to do with their lactation status. So we conducted these 2 visits. They were asked to refrain from feeding or pumping for a few hours before they came in, so we have a similar breast fullness. We fitted the breast shield size. I'll show you that in a moment as well. And we also conducted a 24-hour milk production, so the mothers had to measure their 24-hour intake for their infant. And by doing so, we can then be sure that they're in established lactation. We can be sure that they are at least producing greater than 500 mils of milk per day. And that also helps us a little bit later in order to assess the fullness and emptiness of her breast. So in total, that's 196 pump sessions with the shields. And I'll show you now what we controlled. So as I mentioned, breast fullness was controlled for by asking the mothers to refrain from pumping or feeding, as well as making sure they were in established milk supply. Breast fullness, we also quantified this through fat measurements to make sure that the fullness of the breast was the same at visit 1 as at visit 2 and didn't impact the results. Breast shield size, we selected the appropriate size as per measurement on the first visit, and we used that same size on the second visit. We made sure that the nipple was the same size on the second visit, and it was, obviously. Pumping duration was always 15 minutes after the first milk ejection, and with the crossover design, the one thing that's really controlled for is that breast anatomy, which we know is really variable between women. Okay, so it's a very brief background as to the study design. I want to talk to you a little bit about the mothers. So this was conducted in Switzerland. The most common bra size was C, and the range was from an A to a G. So we had a really vast range of breast sizes in this study. We've also conducted other studies now with a lot higher sample size from qualitative data with a huge range of breast cup sizes as well. The average nipple diameter was 15, and the range was 11 to 21. And what I'll show you now is the sizes of shield that the mothers were selected to use. So what you can see is we had predominantly a 21 millimeter breast shield size selected for these mothers. Second was a 24 millimeter with 20%, and we only saw the use of one mother with 27 millimeter shield. Now this data and this shield sizing is actually representative of global data on nipple diameter. This might be a little surprising, but basically I've been collecting data for a long time now, unpublished and published sources. I have a database of 727 mothers They range from multiple ethnicities and countries, which includes the USA. And surprisingly, no matter which physical, geographical location I'm looking at the data from, the histogram of nipple distribution remains predominantly the same. The mean nipple diameter, including in the US, is around 15 to 16 millimeters. So it's interesting that this isn't a widely available kind of metric that exists out there. Again, not many people are out there measuring nipples. I'm hoping maybe you'll go off and start measuring now that you hear the lack of data. But I will say that even though the study was conducted in Switzerland, the distribution of nipple diameter and matching shield sizes really matches what I've seen in the US data as well. So this is relevant for US. We'll get into the nuance of nipple diameter and sizing towards the end of the presentation. Okay, so the key findings were more milk. So what we saw is that when the mothers were pumping with the oval 105-degree shield, they got out more milk, and by proxy, that also means more milk came out per minute. So that was a nice finding and really reinforced that the shield can make a difference. So I was quite happy with that. When we looked deeper, what we saw is that the first milk ejection occurred faster. So what you'll see is that when the breast shield is on the breast, the nipple is in a more optimal position, which helps it just start to move more readily and stimulate it more readily, and then milk can flow faster. So that's a really nice outcome too. And what's interesting for me is that the increase in milk output, that 11.8%, is predominantly in the first 5 minutes. If we look at the first 2 minutes here, you see that the 105 is releasing more milk than the standard. And if we look between minutes 2 and 5, we see the same thing. That's where we see the increase. Between minutes 5 and 10, there's a little difference, but not really, and very little difference in the last 5 minutes of pumping. So what this says to me is that we're seeing increased milk output in the first 5 minutes, so we're getting more milk out of those first milk ejections. And we know that's when milk flows the fastest or the strongest. So it means that we're allowing the milk to flow more freely in that window of time. And as I mentioned earlier, with that 24-hour milk production, we can also assess how well we are draining the breast. Now, this slide in itself is a whole presentation on PAMR. PAMR is the percentage of available milk removed. This is not going to be the topic of today's presentation. We'll talk about way more fun things than PAMR. But whenever we do a study, we always measure both volume and PAMR. And PAMR helps us to make sure that the difference we see in volume is real. Because for PAMR, we don't just look at volume, we also look at how the fat is changing in the milk. So we know the first drops are a little bit lower in fat, the last drops are a little bit higher in fat. So we model that difference to make sure that the difference is really not that the breast was more full at the start of the session, but that we're really draining more of the milk that was there at the start. And so when we see this number also popping up significant, it means that we really have seen an intervention that really increases milk output. So that's good. That's good because if we improve breast drainage, then the principles of milk production, supply and demand, is that the more milk we drain from the breast, the more likely the breast is to get that signal to increase milk production over time, if that's the goal of the mother. Every bit of milk we leave behind, we're kind of signaling to the breast it's not needed. So we do want to drain the breast well. And this data tells us that the breast shield can impact how well we are draining the breast. And finally, in this really brief overview of the research results, is the comfort rating. So what we asked the mothers was how comfortable they felt the breast shield on their breast. And what you can see here is that when they were using the 105-degree oval shield, they rated it predominantly, it's 88% of mothers, as a strongly agree, so a 5 out of 5. The 90-degree breast shield, as you can see here, which is what we knew, that we see some mothers that are having discomfort using that 90-degree breast shield, we were able to shift them up and into this yellow bar. So while we were only getting about a 50% positive or very positive rate prior, now we're getting an 88% rate. And comfort is really important. we don't want to improve comfort and not get out more milk, right? So we needed to make sure that we weren't just making something very comfortable, but we were actually reducing how much milk came out, because the whole point of it is to get milk out. But what we really wanted to know is if we could get both. So we would like to improve comfort, not at the expense of volume. And the reason that's important is shown here in the key message of the study, is that in general, if we can improve comfort and the overall pumping experience for women, that may mean that pumping becomes less burdensome, and particularly for mothers who have to pump often, particularly if that's not their choice, then reducing some of that burden makes it more likely that they can comply to a pumping regime and make sure that their infants can get more mother's milk. So in the end of the study, the breast shield design and the fit of the breast shield are important factors to improve milk removal. We now know this, and I hope that much more research will come from this study, where we can understand even better other areas that can be targeted to improve this for more mums. So I hope it's just a start. But again, there's not that many people out there that find this topic as interesting as I do. So I feel a little bit like a lone soldier sometimes. However, finally, we have some data that says the shield is truly important. We can't just ignore it. Okay, so why does it make a difference? So that was a really quick overview. I wanted to spend the first few minutes of the presentation just to give you that review of the research, knowing that it's out there now. It's you can access the article free. It's open access. So why? Why does it make a difference? So now I'm going to step a little bit into the detail of some of the key reasons we see driving this improvement in milk output. To show this, I'm going to show first a little video again. You're going to see some of the negatives and positives of the old and the new design. So here you show the standard shield. You can see that it's at that rim there, that there's compression occurring. With the new breast shield, there's a reduction in the pressure applied by that outer rim. And the nipple position here is in a more optimal location. So those are three quick concepts. And I'm now going to go through those in more detail, okay? So don't worry if you missed, oh, I can play it once more, just in case you like videos. So again, standard 90 compression there at the outer rim, not ideal. The new one means a better contact over the surface area of the breast, reducing that pressure and getting the nipple in the location where it can actually do its work. Okay, let's focus firstly on that compression. So what we could see and what we knew is that the standard 90-degree shield design, which has been there basically since the start of breast pumps, I have to say, it's been around a very long time, at least 50 years by Medela, it can compress the breast, particularly at that outer edge and rim. Now, why do we want to avoid this? Why would this be a bad thing? Well, it's a bad thing if we understand how the anatomy of the breast works. So I've got two slides on the anatomy, okay? So the breast anatomy, when you're lactating, has two key tissue types. One is this milk-producing tissue. You see these little alveoli here, these little sacs that are holding the milk, holding and storing the milk. When you have a milk ejection, you want the milk to travel from this little sac through the milk ducts and out. And here are those milk ducts. So this is the transport system of the breast. This is the highway, if you will. And we need to make sure those lanes of that highway are open in all locations of the breast. And the reason that's really important is because if you compress those highways, then as you'll see, you can reduce the flow of milk through them, which could be not ideal. So to demonstrate how the highway works, I have a video here of a milk ejection. Maybe some of you have seen this before, but I don't really mind because I think it's the funnest video ever. Here I'm going to show you a milk duct under ultrasound. So that little guy there is 2 to 3 millimeters in diameter, okay? The nipple's out here, so the milk wants to go from inside the breast through the milk duct and to the nipple. When I press play, you're going to see a milk ejection occur, and you're going to watch this location as it expands in diameter. So now milk ejection is occurring. There's a positive pressure from the left of screen, pushing those flecks of milk there. You see the fat flecks in there, pushing that milk through and expanding the diameter of that milk duct. So that tiny 2 to 3 millimeter milk duct increases by up to 68% at milk ejection, which is pretty incredible. And up here is the surface skin. This is the skin of the breast. So you can see how close that milk duct is to the skin of the breast. And it's up to, these superficial milk ducts can be as little as 4 millimeters from the skin surface. So now if you imagine putting a shield on which compresses, indents in this area here, you can imagine that these milk ducts could be impeded, and some of that flow that would have come through is now not able to come through. And that's why I care about compression and want to avoid it. So what do we do with our breast shields? Well, we take this here. This is the classic 90-degree shield on the left there, right? And we put it onto that delicate tissue. And what is the outcome? Well, as many of you who have any clinical experience with mums pumping, is we can often see this, right? That red circle around where that circular rim has been pushed into the breast and creating that unfortunate redness. Now, this I'll address a little bit later in terms of holding, so that can also be supported. If you're using the current shield or this 90-degree shield, you can also advise mums to hold the system in a better way to avoid pushing the shield system so hard into the tissue, which we know a lot of mums do. But this here is trying to highlight that this is the clinical consequence of this behavior here. So in essence, we wanted to get rid of this point compression here. We want to avoid any point compression along the nipple, the areola, and the breast so that milk can flow through those milk ducts as freely as possible. Okay, so that's the main key driver of why we see increased milk flow with the new breast shield design. I hope that that's clear. I'm not going to look at the chat yet for any questions. We'll come to that at the end. But if you have any questions, just let me know. What I want to skip into now is the fitting piece of this puzzle. So the flange was a really important area that we attempted to fix by opening up to 105 degrees. And that seemed to create some really great outcomes. Now, sorry, I just need to be able to see. So now if we look at our other part of the breast shield here, the tunnel, that's what I'm going to talk about now. So what we've done is tried to fix this flange part, get it out the way so that the breast can now fit in here more nicely. But now we need to fit the tunnel to the nipple. And we do that according to our 4 millimeter rule, which I'll go into now. Okay, so now I'm going to step into the fitting sizing guidelines. So if anyone on the call is still not sure if fitting is important, maybe you're kind of like, okay, there's some new data on a 105 and a 90 flange. Okay, 11.8% more milk. Seems okay, but yeah, I don't know. Is it really that important? Well, fitting is an important topic, and it has been known as an important topic for a long time. But again, not a lot of literature on it. But the literature that does exist is quite compelling. So I'm going to show you now a list of all the direct quotations that I could find in the literature where studies have tried to point out the value of fitting a breast shield, because the consequences of an ill-fitting breast shield are quite severe. On one hand, you see here, if the tunnel of the breast shield is not the right diameter, milk output can be affected. Here, an incorrect fit, you can compress those superficial milk ducts, just like I was mentioning from the flange side. This can also happen in the tunnel if the tunnel is too small, for example. It's suggested in the literature that a main culprit for sore nipples may be using an incorrectly sized breast shield. If it's too large, you might get decreased milk expression, and if it's too small, you might see damage to the nipple and the breast. You might see friction and damage. And then this last one here says that we need to continually reevaluate fit for mothers. And this is predominantly mums that are in hospital. So you're seeing them on day 1 and 2 and then 3 and day 7. Once you've had your baby and you're 2 and 3 weeks later, it doesn't seem to be so variable anymore. But in those first days and weeks after birth, reevaluating fit can be a really key reason or a key need, as it can be contributing to sore nipples, plugged milk ducts, and low milk supply. So there's not a lot out there, but I think many of you on the call know that this is a really important thing to do and to do well. But again, if there's not a lot of literature, there's also not a lot of advice on how to do it. So I hope that the next piece of the puzzle here I'll explain now helps guide you a little bit more into the why the fitting guidelines exist and where they come from so that you can interpret them and apply them in your practice. I have simplified the whole process, of course, for presentation's sake, but there are a few key steps we can take when it comes to fitting and finding the right size breast shield. The first step would be to measure. So this slide here, I'm going to describe measure and select. So what I'm going to show you is a little video of how to do this, which is a nice way of me not having to, again, wave my arms around because you can't see me. So I'm going to let the video do the talking, and I'll guide you through it. So in general, one step, or the first step you can do to assess which size is best, is to measure the diameter of the nipple. Not the areola, but the nipple, as described here in this image. If you have that measurement, then you can determine which size breast shield would best suit that mother as a first step. The way we can do that, if we have a look up here on the top, the video will keep playing, but that's okay. What I'm moving on to now up here is this idea of the nipple diameter relative to the shield size. So what we drew here is, you can see we want to have a difference between the nipple diameter measurement and the tunnel diameter. The reason for this is that the nipple will increase in diameter during pumping. So we've seen this happen. It's around a 2 to 3 millimeter increase during pumping. So when you measure the nipple diameter before pumping, you add 4 millimeters to that measurement. And what that equates to is simply this. If you measure a nipple up to 17 millimeters, then you put on a 21 millimeter shield. If you measure up to 20, then you put on a 24. If you measure up to a 23, you put onto a 27. Okay? So it's a very simple first step that helps be able to determine or select what appears to be the best tunnel diameter for that mum's resting nipple state. That's step one. But it's really important that this is only the first step, because a lot can happen in step two when we test it. Okay? So let's look now at step two, which is testing. So I'm going to, again, play the video so you can see a nice stylized version of how this looks. So the mother applies the breast shield, she pumps for a few minutes. Ideally, she's at her maximum comfortable vacuum, and she's in expression mode, and her nipple should move freely. In this imagery here, you can see that that nipple is too large for the tunnel, and there's redness on the nipple itself. And on this one, you see there's excessive areola being pulled in, and that there would also be problematic in terms of comfort and potential trauma to the tissue. Mums can also try another shield if they're just really uncomfortable with whichever size they measured at, because in the end, comfort trumps all of this, right? If the mum finds herself just super comfortable in a shield that appears too large, if that's what's comfortable for her, then comfort and oxytocin, the comfort can also be a key driver. If the mother has any redness or whiteness, you could try and recheck a different size, or if the mum really feels that she still has milk remaining in the breast after she's pumped. So if we have a look here, this was kind of the summary. So I'll try and find quickly those screenshots again. So here is that nipple being too large, right? So what happens here is that the nipple, maybe it was fine prior, but now it's expanded during pumping, expanded to the point where it's in contact with the tunnel. The tissue cannot move freely, it's restrained, and you can really get some damage on the tissue of the nipple itself. Then the other diagram here showed the areola. So this one is really quite common, actually. So we see here a lot of this areola creeps in because a lot of mums are in shields that are a little bit too big. And what will happen is that any milk ducts in the areola region are going to be compromised or restricted. And you can also get damage or discomfort at the base of the nipple or along the tissue of the areola itself. So these are the two things to watch out for. And the goal is to make sure that nipple can move freely, but not have too much of this tissue entering into the tunnel. So the test part is equally as important as the measure part. If this was simple, then we would just simply measure and everything would be magically falling into place. But it's not. And as clinicians, you have even more complexity because this dynamic changes over time in those first days after birth, which I'm going to mention in a minute. So breast shield size will depend on tissue and skin elasticity as well as edema. These types of issues, you can only really see them during pumping, okay? And that's why the test part is so important. So it's great to help mum measure, help her select the right, what is believed to be the correct tunnel size for her. But then if you observe a pumping session and you see these issues I'm going to describe in a moment, this edema or elasticity, then you'll have to find an alternative solution for her. Okay, really easy, right? I know this is complex, but I hope that this imagery helps make this a little bit simpler in terms of a to-do process. So since I believe I have a lot of people from hospitals on the call, I wanted to add in some sections specifically on hospital. So edema. Now, edema is a really I would say still a fairly new topic in terms of its impact on our understanding of breast shield sizing. Edema in general is, of course, well known. And what I'm referring to in this case is specifically linked to that delivery of IV fluids to the mother during labor. This has been linked to postpartum breast changes like edema and swelling. So these mothers, these edematous mothers, we see them, right? They've been overloaded with fluids and they have this edema on their extremities. The breast and nipple and areola itself is also an extremity, right? So we see that same type of swelling occurring in the breast area. And we know this can also create challenges for infant to latch. So if it is a challenge for an infant to latch, then you can see why there's obvious challenges for a breast shield to latch, right? So most around the world right now, I understand there are procedures and protocols in place to reduce overloading of IV fluids in general. So this should not exist in most hospitals anymore. So not because of the breastfeeding related outcomes, but just in general to tailor IV fluids more appropriately. Most countries have eliminated a lot of the heavy edema patients that they were seeing. I don't know much about the US setting, but I understand that there might still be some spots where edema is more prevalent than others, depending on hospital practice, but potentially also dependent on your demographic. So for example, if you have a lot of mothers with high BMIs, it may be that those mums are more likely to hold on to IV fluids, are more prone to edema and swelling. So it might be that you see more of this issue in your hospital based on your demographic. Okay, so having this edema in the nipple and areola tissue can impact sizing. And what I can tell you from some facilities that have been looking at this topic is that basically the current understanding or viewpoint is that some mums with edema, they may do better with larger breast shields in those first days, but they have to be tracked very carefully. So once that edema subsides, then they should be fitted according to their actual resting nipple diameter again. And what we're seeing is some mums are sized maybe on day 1 or day 2, and then they're not followed up. And so they remain, for example, they get a very large size, and then they stay in that large size throughout their lactation journey, actually. There was a mother that came in for this particular randomized control trial, and she was using a 27, which is a larger size. And I said, I'm fitting you to a 21. And she said, oh, I'm not so sure. In the hospital, they told me I was a 27. And I said, well, let's just go by the structure of the protocol, which is we'll fit you according to your measurement. And she said, oh, wow, that's so much more comfortable. This is a much better fit. And so for me, it was very clear the hospital staff did the right thing to put her in a 27 at the start, but it would have been great if she could have had been resized later or told to recheck that at a later date. Okay, so edema is a little bit of a pickle, but keep an eye out for it, and it may be that you need to just provide a bigger size at the beginning and then make sure you monitor that mum and size her down appropriately when necessary. Elastic tissue. Okay, so tissue and skin elasticity also impact sizing. This is, in an extreme form, a more rare event, but it's certainly one to mention here since you're going to be at the front line. If a mum has a very elastic tissue, that tissue may fill the shield and the tunnel almost completely. Anecdotal reports indicate that mums may find a larger size breast shield, in this case more comfortable, because it can just accommodate more tissue, both in the amount that can enter and in the distance or length it can enter. Now I have a picture now I'm going to show you of a mother who was in a study from around 5 years ago, so not the study to do with the new shield, but we could actually capture this. So at the top here, you see now a mother who, at first glance, when she started pumping, everything looks completely normal, right? That nipple relative to that tunnel size seems okay. The tissue does not look out of the ordinary at all. And we start to apply the vacuum, and that tissue just continues to creep in there all the way to the end. So that tissue is in contact with the tunnel all the way to here, and the nipple is not touching the end of the tunnel, but it's close, okay? So when I asked her what she was using a large size, a 27, so that she could just have longer tunnel, quite simply. So the bigger the shield, in general, the more, the longer the tunnel is, just so it can fit into the connector. It's just a proxy of the design. But that can be a really interesting case. They're not very common, but when they happen, there's something that's the solution, basically, is you can offer whatever shield is more comfortable for her is the one that she should be using. Okay, so when should we use larger sizes? Obviously, if the nipple diameter is larger than 20 millimeters, so a 21 millimeter nipple and up can go into a larger size. However, according to that global database, this is approximately 10% at most mothers, okay? So it's not the majority of mothers that are using a larger size based on their nipple diameter. You would also be indicated to try a larger size if you have this elastic tissue and or this edema or swelling. And that there you would then resize at a later time point. So those are 3 reasons why you might size up. But the majority of mums without elasticity issues, without edema, and who do not have these larger than 20 nipples will do better in 21s and 24s. Okay. So the new breast shield, all of this is relevant for the new breast shield, okay? So we only changed the flange. The tunnel, the 4 millimeter rule, everything I've just mentioned before, that fits for the new breast shield. So the influence on the fitting guidelines in this case is minimal. However, what you'll see, if we follow that video once more, is that because we get that contact much better here, we really get the nipple in a more optimal position there. And that means that what becomes more important now is really an emphasis on fit. So when you're using the new breast shield, you can really get great results if the mother is fitted well. And so I'll show that again here. So what you're seeing when you put on the 90-degree today is this restriction area here and here. You can see the tissue is not contacting the flange when you first put it on, and the nipple is quite far back. With the new one, the tissue is contacting over the whole surface of that flange, and the nipple is further in. So what that means is that the rim of the flange is no longer compressing or holding back the breast. Can you see that? So that means that the tissue can move more freely from the breast, the areola, and the nipple in. If mothers are using sizes that are too large, this can mean that with the new design, it's much more important that they use the appropriate size, i.e. a smaller size. Okay? This is a little complex. I hope I'm explaining it well. But if the tissue can get in there more readily, then we need to make sure that the nipple and tunnel match better. And we were kind of maybe able to get away with it a little bit better with this design because the rim itself was holding back the tissue and not seeing so much of the mismatch between the tunnel and the nipple. So this is really good for milk removal, right? That's why we wanted to get rid of this piece here. And now you have the tools as to how to fit, so measure and fit and then have a test. So the solution is easy, but if we were not focused on fitting with the new design, it's really good if we can have a refresh focus on fitting. And here is an image of what that looks like in terms of the old one here. So you can see immediately, you see that tissue hanging over the edge here, the mum's holding it on there. The nipple is so far back that when we say you should center your nipple in the tunnel before pumping, well, it's actually really hard to do that with a standard conventional shield because the nipple is not even in the tunnel. And all of this space here between the nipple and the flange is all going to need to be evacuated with the pump. So the pump is going to have to pull the tissue from this anchor point all the way here, pull all that tissue in, which is not optimal for those milk duct structures. So by having the new design, you see the contact is over the surface area here. So the tissue is able to pull in from a more general area rather than from a point area. The nipple is further in the tunnel, so your mum can actually see it in order to center properly. And when you turn on the pump, the nipple can just start moving rather than having to deform all the breast and pull it in. So with the new shield, it's the exact same thing, 4 millimeter rule, and fit according to that, with the nuance of, double checking the diameter matches the nipple. And if you're in a hospital environment, keep an eye out for that edema and the elastic mama. Okay. The last two slides here, I want to mention the oval shape. As I mentioned, the oval shape's kind of just a bonus. It's actually just a little optical illusion per se. But what it does provide is this ability, because it is a little bit wider on one dimension, mums do actually like to play around with it. So the most important thing on this slide is that you cannot hold the shield really wrong. Okay, so you can advise mums just find the orientation that works best for you, for your breast at this point in time, and for your comfort. Okay, and we asked mums when they were doing some of the studies, we found that the majority of mums choose to put the oval shape in the horizontal orientation, then 30% put it in the vertical, and a few put it in the oblique. The reason why they choose these are breast fit and holding comfort. So if they have it in this direction, then their fingers can fit nicely over their thumb, and their fingers can fit nicely over there if they're holding in this orientation, which means it's more comfortable to hold. What was really interesting, though, is that a third of mothers actually changed the position over time. So they took this shield home and they would change it up. So in the morning, their breast felt more full, and so they would hold it in a certain orientation. By the end of the day, their breast felt a bit more empty. They preferred to hold it maybe in this orientation. So it provides this flexibility to hold and fit it to the breast based on how the mother feels for comfort in that moment. But otherwise, it doesn't bring a strong clinical advantage. The angle is what is really driving that clinical advantage. Now, holding. This is really important, how you hold the shield. Now, I'm going to tell you this for all shields out there, okay? Mothers should be encouraged to hold any shield at the breast. That means they should avoid holding the bottle, okay? If you have your hand on your breast, cupping the breast and holding the shield, this means that you're distributing the surface area of the footprint of the shield over the full surface area of the breast. What we see, I'm going to show you two images now, which we see very commonly, right? These types of one-arm holds. So what you see here, in this case, her arm is hooked in underneath here. What will be happening is that the underside of the breast is getting that rim of the breast shield kind of digging into it. And when you're holding the bottles like this, you really tend to push hard onto the breast, and you end up with those red circles, okay? So these type of holds are very useful, and they can be used while manually, playing with the pump settings or so, but they should be encouraged to be used really temporarily and not be used for long sections of the pump session. One example of this was a mother that came in one of our studies, who was doing this hold during the study with us. So this was an observational study on fitting that was performed in around 10 years ago, actually. Wow, I'm getting old. So she was pumping like this, and the bottle in this section here was about half as full as the bottle on this breast. And so she put the bottles down and she said, oh, that always happens. My left breast always has less milk than my right breast. And I said, oh, really? That's interesting. She said, yeah. So what I do now is I take the left bottle again, I put it on, and I just pump my left breast for another 10 minutes. And what happens is, at the end, both bottles are equally full. And so I suggested that perhaps, the reason why she was getting less milk out was because of how her arm was pushing that shield system into her breast. And so when she stopped doing that and held them like this, then both bottles filled equally. So that was a pretty dramatic difference, which, honestly kind of blew my mind a little bit when it happened. Her interpretation was the left produced less, but in fact it didn't because she got it out in the second round of pumping, right? So how the mum holds the shields on there is really, can really play with this idea of compression, and it should be avoided. That's for any shield. For the new shield, it's the same advice. One should still be holding the shield across its footprint like this. Because now the only thing that is new is that the seal will be across the surface area of this internal part. One should not be, so what happens with our conventional shield is that circle really digs in, and that circle becomes the seal, right? This does not have to be the case for the new shield. We don't want the rim to be the seal, right? We want the seal to occur across the whole surface of contour of the breast. If a little part of the rim is not in contact with the breast and there's still vacuum being generated, that's totally okay. So you do see that sometimes little wings pop out because they're not necessary for the seal. The seal is occurring all the way down here. But just be aware that's something new. So if you see that with the conventional shield, you would think, oh my gosh, no, there's no seal, the rim's off the breast, that's bad. If the rim is not directly on the breast with the new one, that's okay, as long as there's a seal across the rest of the flange itself. But we need to, if you're dealing with mums who have been using the conventional shields for really long periods of time, then they have to maybe unlearn some habits. And that's like anything that is new, right? So the way that you hold it, the way that you've managed to figure out doing this type of behavior, all these little tricks that mums learn with that 90-degree cup may need to be unlearned, or new tricks need to be learned with this new one, okay? We had one mother, we conducted a small study in Germany, and she was unhappy because what she was doing with the conventional breast shield was that she was jamming her breast into it so that it would suction onto her breast and she could take her hands off entirely. And she liked that because she said, oh, it's like it has a mini suction on my breast. Now I have to hold the shield on there because I can't jam my breast into that circle anymore. Okay, so usability-wise, it's not ideal that you can't jam your breast into the new shield like you could with the old shield, but if you're pumping to get milk output, then jamming your breast into that round, small, restrictive area is not ideal for your milk ducts. So again, the goal of this is to make sure that we can have free-flowing milk throughout. I think I just saw a little question pop up. Something said about a hands-free bra. A pumping bra. These work perfectly fine with a pumping bra. So pumping bras are in general great. If a mum is, say, if she's pump dependent, if she's in a NICU and she's pumping, a lot, it can be always advisable to suggest she pumps sometimes with and sometimes without, just to make sure the bra itself doesn't bring any compression. But if the mother wants to use that and she's getting good supply, then that's fantastic. If she's wondering if it's the right thing for her supply, then she can maybe use it every other time, just to see what happens. But these shields work fine with the pumping bra. Okay, so that was a lot. Here's some key messages on sizing. So in general, breast shield size does not equal breast size does not equal tunnel size. So what that means is that large breasts do not necessarily have large nipples, right? So I know this might seem really obvious, but what we were hearing along over the last years is that there was a belief that if a mother had a very large breast, she needed a very large breast shield size. That is not true. Now that we know that the nipple is the key driver for the tunnel diameter, then we need to look at her nipple and not her overall breast size. The nipple diameter increases during pumping, so that's why we measure and add that 4 millimeters to make sure the nipple can expand happily during pumping. Mums may need a different size on their left and right breast. None of us are equal, left and right. Don't push that shield in too hard. Old shield, new shield, any shield, just avoid doing that because it can compress the milk ducts. The size will depend on elasticity, and we can only really see this when the mum's pumping. The same goes for edema. You can see edema prior, so if you have indications that it might be edematous tissue, you can already apply your clinical thinking to that scenario. But you'll see the swelling really occur dramatically during pumping when you assess that pump session. And it may change over lactation. So whatever we have, whatever we size on the first day 1 and day 2, maybe always try to do a little recheck-in with the mum to see if she should be differently sized at a later time point. And at that, I believe I'm on the final slide. Good. Okay. So.
All right. Thank you, Danielle, for that great information. That was very informative and helpful. We do have a few questions coming in. We do have a little bit of time to answer them. We do have a lot of questions coming in about hospital packs coming with the 27, 21. Those questions I'll actually capture and ask our product manager about. So I will go ahead and email the answer out to everyone at a later time. But we do have a question. Someone that asked, I was wondering if you found any moms were using the wrong size shield prior to the study.
Yeah, we did. I believe I mentioned one mother who came in and she was adamant she was a 27. And then once we tested her or pumped with the 21, she was like, oh, okay, yep, all right, I'm in the better one now. So a lot of the mums, if they've never been sized, they're just taking what was in the box. So, that impacted it a lot. But in general, I would say of the 49 mothers, maybe half of them had never even heard about sizing at all, which is, lucky them. They were doing fine. Of the other half, they had tried to get information, and some were sized up and some were sized down. So there wasn't really a consistency, but this is in Switzerland. So I would say in the last few years, the guidelines, this structured approach to how to fit has really been developed. And I'm hoping that if I did the study again, we would see a much more structured response from the participants. So it's a really good question. There will be a chunk of mothers who really don't have too many negative effects so we don't want to scare mums, right? So we don't want to say, if you don't have the right breast shield size, nothing will work for you. In general, if you're at home, you're going back to work, you start pumping, it's good enough, and you're getting supply, that's great. Like, don't stress about it. But if you are feeling like any of those indications I mentioned, then this is a key thing to explore. And I believe now in the US, since we've done a lot of education, we're seeing a lot more 21s being sold and used because nipple diameters are really just not that big, actually. They can be very useful, the larger sizes in the hospital, because of the reasons I listed. But in the general retail area, it seems not so much. Not so useful.
Okay, thank you for answering that question. We only have a couple minutes left, and there's a few more questions coming in. The bulk of the questions were about using a nursing bra and about the different sizes coming in our kits, which I explained that I will ask the product manager about. But we'll go ahead and wrap it up for the day. I did want to, I forgot at the beginning of the call, wish everyone a happy World Breastfeeding Week. I meant to mention at the beginning of the call, but I forgot. And also I wanted to mention a couple other things. A few people were asking about handouts. If you missed downloading those when you logged into the webinar today, you can email education@medela.com. and we can send you the handouts and the abstract for the research that Danielle talked about. The actual study is available online, as Danielle expressed. And I wanted to mention a couple things about up-and-coming webinars that we have. This Friday, August 7th, we have a special global webinar to celebrate World Breastfeeding Week. Then on August 11th, 12th, and 20th, we're excited to have a webinar exclusive for the unveiling of our new pump and style with MaxFlow technology. And those webinars will be followed by our August 19th webinar and September 16th webinars. For more information on all of those and to register, you can visit medelaeducation.com. And again, we thank everyone for joining us today and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you, Danielle.
No problem. Have a great day, everybody.